Good evening, everyone. It is July 28th. Going to talk about the war in Ukraine, specifically taking a look at Russia's offensive operations up near Sumy. So we'll zoom in there, and you can see Sumy located right here. And basically, after the main charge, and then Ukraine retaking Kharkiv and Kherson, the war somewhat shifted. It's been a grind. Think places like Bakhmut, Avdiivka, where battles dragged on for months, with the rule being once you lose ground, it's gone, or it's going to take forever to get it back, with a lot of manpower losing their lives or being wounded. But that's changing. Back on May 23rd, Russia crossed the border in order to try to push towards Sumy, which is a key logistics hub as well as a launching point for a lot of operations. Understand that the Russian border is right here. So this was just a cross-border operation. Russia was using hit-and-run tactics, and they wanted to bait Ukrainian reserves into moving to this location. That was a bad move because apparently Russian intelligence didn't know that Ukraine already had standard troops there, didn't need reserves, and they ran into a brick wall. And as such, we saw Ukraine start to encircle Russia from three sides and begin to push back. Russia was not anticipating this level of resistance in this location, but Ukraine started regaining territory, especially on Russia's right flank. Again, this is right flank with Russia's facing. It would be your left, but Russia's right flank. The problem here is Russia started this fight apparently without the necessary artillery and backup reserves to continue to sustain here. And a lot of that is because they didn't anticipate the resistance Ukraine was going to put up, because Ukraine was doing a lot of their defensive work down near Pokrovsk, down in the southern portions where another main effort was taking place. And with Russia losing some 8,000 troops a week, which is actually up from their normal 7,600 to 7,800, the Russians just aren't sustaining this. And so the Russians have lost Andriivka and Kindrativka. Make no mistake, when you look at the battle arrangements in 2019, Russia losing ground mere kilometers from their border should not be happening. And it largely is because Vladimir Putin does not want to fully commit. He sees Russia's economy buckling. They're burning through cash on recruitments, and now we're seeing the Duma want to seize oligarchs' assets to pay for the war. The oligarchy is what props Putin up. The Moscow Times quoted Nikolai Arefiev saying they want to generate $25 billion from the oligarchy just to go fight this war. That is a desperation play. And because Putin is scared of a draft that would spark riots, or the oligarchs potentially plotting a coup, Putin is delaying the reinforcing of the entire front line, and Ukraine is exploiting that. What's even more impressive is that they're doing this despite the U.S. pullback in equipment that happened starting in March of 2025. Now, understand that the U.S. is now ramping that back up, and other G7 nations and the European Union have been providing additional aid as well, but this is not the same fervor that we saw out of the U.S. 2 years ago. This is being done by Ukraine's domestic production of drones and weapons and their own smart tactics. Now, the next thing we're seeing in this region is Ukraine went on a counteroffensive and is now pushing into Russian territory. This is something that Putin cannot have. So Russia is having to reinforce this location using troops that were originally a part of the Sumy offensive. And because of that, Russia's 2025 summer offensive that was supposed to push and take Sumy has stopped right here, mere kilometers from the Russian border, with nothing more to show of it other than the Ukrainians now pushing into Russian-held territory and the country of Russia yet again, as this has expanded and been the most consequential amount of territory that Ukraine has gained since the Kursk incursion. And I just want to once again highlight, in 2019, no one on earth would have ever thought that Ukraine was capable of taking and holding territory from the Russian Federation, and they are doing it now. And that's not all. Ukraine is now pushing in up here too into Russian territory. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that both President Zelensky and Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrskyi have changed the tactics for Ukraine. They feel that the tables are turning, albeit slowly, but they are turning. And they both went public saying that in Ukraine, there will no longer be a pure defense. I've talked about the attritional war that Ukraine has fought over the last few years, and they've been largely successful at it. But now Zelensky and Syrskyi feel that they are gaining the upper hand across much of the battlefields. And so they're moving away from this pure defense, this pure attritional fight, to a precision offense-defense tactic where they will strike into Russia with troops as they see fit, causing panic. And when those strikes take place and territory is taken, it strikes at the heart of Vladimir Putin's regime, because that shouldn't be happening according to the Kremlin and their propaganda. We are also seeing the Ukrainians push more forcefully in places that we haven't heard for a long time, specifically Zaporizhia. Also, Kherson, which is over that way. The movement is slow, but it is deliberate. Russia may be closing in on Pokrovsk, but make no mistake, Ukraine is fighting this fight, but this is no longer a key terrain for Ukraine anymore. They have pulled out of this location, so it will be a Pyrrhic victory for Russia if it ever happens. Again, Russia has been trying to take Pokrovsk for something like 18 months now and have been failing miserably at it. They just have incrementally chipped away, and more Russian soldiers have died trying to take Pokrovsk and then have tried to take Bakhmut, Mariupol, or any other medium-sized city within Ukraine. This has become a veritable graveyard for Russian soldiers, and yet they still persist, despite the fact that the Ukrainians have largely relocated their capabilities elsewhere. So it is actually Ukraine that is doing a lot of the baiting. They're still fighting this attritional war in places like Pokrovsk, but they're also pushing back up near Sumy, and they're putting Putin's back against the wall here. He's got to start thinking about a mobilization and risk rebellion, potentially seize more oligarch wealth to pay for more soldiers, or he might face some sort of overthrow because of the failures leading to their economy having such problems. And nothing will undermine Putin's efforts as the leader of Russia than the front line broadly collapsing in multiple areas, and you see a large swath of territory retaken by Ukraine, perhaps in places like Zaporizhia. Putin had touted that this was supposed to be the summer that Russia was going to finally drive a stake into Ukraine's heart. It seems that it's more of the same. However, every year we see Ukraine become more incrementally powerful. And now it seems that Vladimir Putin is facing down a Donald Trump that is sick and tired of his shit, quite frankly. And at worst, no longer has the support of the Trump administration to prosecute this war. At best, we may see a massive influx of capability move into Ukraine to finally put an end to this war, with Russia being the loser.